Hello everyone, and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. Finn's revelation of a deadly DNA secret detonates like a seismic charge beneath the already fragile foundations of the Forrester dynasty, transforming what begins as a moment of scientific truth into a devastating emotional reckoning that shatters Ridge Forrester's identity, legacy, and place in the family forever. Because this is not merely a plot twist but a catastrophic unraveling of decades of belief, loyalty, and power. The script frames Finn not just as a doctor delivering test results, but as an unwilling executioner of the past, a man burdened with knowledge so volatile it can erase bloodlines, rewrite history, and annihilate the meaning of a name, and when he finally speaks, the silence that follows is louder than any explosion, because in those few words lies the death of certainty itself. Ridge, who has spent his entire life standing at the crossroads of Eric and Stephanie's love, rivalry, and ambition, suddenly finds himself suspended over a void, learning that the DNA he trusted to define him carries a truth so poisonous it threatens not only his claim to the Forrester legacy but his right to exist as Eric's son at all. The script masterfully builds this collapse by allowing Ridge a brief, cruel moment of denial, clinging to rage as a shield, attacking Finn's credibility, accusing manipulation, conspiracy, and betrayal, because for a man like Ridge, anger is safer than grief, and defiance is easier than annihilation, yet Finn remains immovable, his voice steady, his conscience clear, repeating the facts with clinical precision that feels almost sadistic in its calmness, because science does not soften its blows for legacy or love. As the truth sinks in, the narrative pivots to Eric Forrester, whose reaction is not immediate fury but a haunted stillness that reveals the true depth of the wound, because this revelation does not merely take a son from him, it resurrects old betrayals, questions his marriage, and forces him to confront the possibility that his entire paternal bond with Ridge was built on a lie that everyone else somehow sensed but he refused to see. The moment Eric finally speaks is one of the most chilling in the script, not because of volume, but because of finality, as he utters the words "You're not my son" with a restraint that feels more lethal than screaming, stripping Ridge of identity in a single sentence and signaling that forgiveness is not merely unavailable but unimaginable. This disownment is not impulsive, it is framed as the culmination of years of resentment, power struggles, and moral exhaustion, with Eric interpreting the DNA secret not as an accident of biology but as the ultimate confirmation that Ridge never truly belonged, that the conflicts, the challenges to authority, the endless clashes over control of Forrester creations were symptoms of a deeper, unspoken truth now brutally exposed. When Eric throws Ridge out of Forrester creations, the act is both literal and symbolic, expelling him not just from the building but from the dynasty, the boardroom, and the sacred lineage that defined Ridge's sense of self, and the script lingers on Ridge standing alone, surrounded by the empire he helped build yet suddenly forbidden to touch, a tragic irony that underscores the cruelty of legacy-based power. There is no dramatic music cue to soften the blow, no last-minute reprieve, no tearful reconciliation, because the script is unapologetic in its commitment to consequences, portraying Eric's decision as irrevocable and Ridge's loss as absolute, forcing the audience to confront the unsettling question of whether blood alone should determine belonging, or whether decades of loyalty, love, and contribution should matter more. The brilliance of the storyline lies in its refusal to provide easy villains. Because Finn is not malicious, Eric is not cartoonishly cruel, and Ridge is not innocent, each man acting according to his own truth, his own wounds, his own interpretation of justice, which makes the fallout feel tragically inevitable rather than contrived. As the revelation ripples outward, the script subtly weaves in the silent reactions of the wider Forrester family, the stunned glances, the unspoken calculations, the fear that if Ridge can be erased, no one's place is truly secure, turning the DNA secret into a thematic exploration of power, legitimacy, and the fragility of inherited identity. Ridge's devastation is portrayed not through melodramatic collapse but through quiet disintegration, his confidence hollowed out, his voice cracking as he realizes that everything he fought for, every sacrifice he made, every war he waged in the name of the Forrester legacy was built on a belief that no longer exists, leaving him untethered from past and future alike. The line "no forgiveness left" echoes throughout the script like a curse, emphasizing that this is not a story about redemption but about reckoning, about what happens when truths are revealed too late, when wounds are reopened beyond repair, and when love curdles into something unrecognizable under the weight of betrayal and pride. In disowning Ridge, Eric is not only punishing him but protecting himself, choosing certainty over compassion, control over complexity, and legacy over love, a decision that cements his role as both patriarch and executioner of his own family myth. The script's power lies in how it transforms a medical test into a moral apocalypse, using the language of DNA to interrogate the meaning of fatherhood, the violence of rejection, and the terrifying possibility that who we believe ourselves to be can vanish in an instant, leaving nothing behind but memory and regret. By the end, Ridge's world is not merely shattered, it is erased and rewritten by others, while Finn stands as a tragic catalyst, forever marked as the man who told the truth that destroyed a dynasty, and Eric remains alone at the top of Forrester Creations, victorious yet hollow, ruling an empire secured by blood but haunted by the son he cast out, making this storyline not just a shocking twist but a profound meditation on identity, power, and the irreversible cost of truth. In the aftermath of Eric's brutal disownment, the script does not allow the dust to settle, instead pressing relentlessly forward into the emotional vacuum left behind, where Ridge Forrester exists like a ghost haunting the corridors of a life that no longer recognizes him, and this continuation deepens the tragedy by exploring not just what Ridge has lost, but what the Forrester family, and even Eric himself, may have destroyed in the process of defending blood over bond. Ridge's exile from Forrester Creations becomes more than a corporate dismissal, it is an existential free fall, a stripping away of purpose that leaves him wandering through memories like ruins, recalling moments of triumph, love, and sacrifice that now feel fraudulent, as though every achievement is being retroactively erased by a strand of DNA he never knew could condemn him. The script lingers on Ridge's isolation, emphasizing how silence replaces authority, how phones stop ringing, how allies become observers, and how the man once feared and admired in equal measure is suddenly reduced to a question mark, a liability no one knows how to place, underscoring the cruelty of a world where identity is conditional and loyalty is fragile. Finn, meanwhile, is not allowed the comfort of moral clarity. The continuation makes it painfully clear that truth, once released, does not absolve its messenger, and Finn begins to experience the weight of what he has done as relationships strain, eyes harden, and whispers follow him. Because even though he acted ethically, he has become synonymous with destruction, the living embodiment of a secret that should perhaps have remained buried. His internal conflict is rendered with precision, as he questions whether saving lives in an operating room truly prepares a person to dismantle lives in a boardroom, and whether some truths, though factual, are too lethal to be delivered without mercy. Eric's apparent victory, too, is revealed as hollow, and the continuation peels back his stoic resolve to expose a man increasingly haunted by doubt, not about the science, but about the righteousness of his response. As nights grow longer, memories sharper, and the absence of Ridge becomes a presence that looms over Forrester Creations like an unspoken accusation. The script subtly reveals that in severing Ridge, Eric may have severed the last living connection to the version of himself who once loved fiercely rather than ruled absolutely, suggesting that the act of disownment was less about justice and more about control, a desperate attempt to impose order on a truth that exposed vulnerability he could not tolerate. Brooke, positioned at the emotional crossroads of this fallout, becomes the voice of uncomfortable questions, challenging the notion that DNA should outweigh decades of fatherhood, partnership, and shared history, and though her protests fall on deaf ears, they plant seeds of doubt that slowly germinate within the family, turning certainty into unease. The continuation uses these interpersonal fractures to explore a broader theme, that legacy built solely on blood is inherently unstable, because it ignores the human labor, love, and sacrifice that actually sustain dynasties, and by expelling Ridge, Eric has not purified the Forrester name but destabilized it, creating a vacuum where resentment, fear, and ambition begin to fester. As Ridge struggles to redefine himself outside the Forrester shadow, the script resists easy redemption, portraying his journey not as a triumphant reinvention but as a painful reckoning with ego, entitlement, and the realization that much of his identity was tethered to validation from a father who may never have truly seen him. There are moments where Ridge contemplates whether Eric's rejection confirms his deepest fear, that he was always an outsider trying to earn a love that was never guaranteed, and this psychological unraveling is portrayed with restraint, making it all the more devastating as pride slowly gives way to grief. Meanwhile, the Forrester empire begins to show cracks, as decisions once guided by Ridge's instincts falter, creative risks diminish, and the company's culture grows colder, more transactional, subtly implying that in purging a perceived impurity, Eric may have also purged the very fire that drove Forrester creations to greatness. The continuation does not rush toward reconciliation. Instead, it sharpens the knife by allowing time to pass, letting consequences accumulate, and showing how absolutes harden into prisons, trapping both the rejected and the rejecter in roles they can no longer escape. Finn's role evolves from catalyst to conscience, as he becomes increasingly vocal about the human cost of the revelation, questioning Eric directly in a confrontation that is tense not because of shouting but because of restraint, as Finn dares to suggest that being a father is an act, not a test result, and that in denying Ridge, Eric may have betrayed not biology, but love itself. Eric's refusal to bend in this moment is chilling, reinforcing the script's central assertion that some men would rather be right than whole, and that power, once threatened, often responds with cruelty disguised as principle. The continuation culminates not in a dramatic reversal but in a quiet, devastating realization shared by multiple characters, that the Forrester family has crossed a line from which there may be no return, because even if forgiveness were offered, it could never restore what was taken, the certainty of belonging, the safety of identity, and the illusion that love within this dynasty was unconditional. Ridge's final moments in this arc are deliberately ambiguous, positioning him at the edge of a new life yet haunted by an old one, his future undefined, his past irrevocably altered, embodying the script's ultimate message that truth does not heal by default, that revelation without compassion can be as destructive as any lie, and that when a father says, "You're not my son," the damage extends far beyond bloodlines, reshaping generations, redefining power, and leaving behind a legacy not of strength, but of loss that no empire, no matter how vast, can truly contain. As the narrative pushes further into the aftermath, the continuation intensifies its focus on the long-term psychological, relational, and generational consequences of Eric's irreversible decision, making it clear that the true damage is not confined to Ridge's exile but radiates outward like a slow-burning fracture that threatens to split the Forrester legacy from within. Ridge's life beyond the gates of Forrester Creations becomes an exercise in disorientation, where freedom feels less like liberation and more like abandonment, and the world he once dominated now treats him as obsolete, forcing him to confront a terrifying truth he has long avoided, that power insulated him from self-awareness, and without it, he must finally reckon with who he is when no one is obligated to listen. The script portrays this reckoning not as noble self-discovery but as raw, humiliating vulnerability, as Ridge grapples with rage that has nowhere to land, grief that no one feels entitled to comfort, and an identity crisis that cuts deeper than the DNA revelation itself, because the most painful loss is not Eric's name, but the certainty that he ever truly had a place. Meanwhile, Eric's authority within Forrester Creations grows more rigid, more uncompromising, as though tightening control might silence the unease creeping into his own conscience, and the continuation subtly suggests that his absolutism is less about conviction and more about fear that if he allows ambiguity, if he acknowledges that fatherhood can transcend biology, the foundation of his power may collapse under the weight of emotional complexity he has spent a lifetime suppressing. This fear manifests in colder leadership, harsher decisions, and an increasing intolerance for dissent, transforming the company into a reflection of Eric's internal state, pristine on the surface yet brittle beneath, where loyalty is demanded but no longer inspired. Brooke's role becomes increasingly pivotal, not as a savior but as a witness who refuses to normalize the cruelty of the disownment, and though she is powerless to reverse Eric's decree, her quiet resistance preserves the moral tension of the storyline, reminding the audience that silence in the face of injustice is its own form of complicity. The continuation deepens her internal conflict as well, as she struggles with loving a man who has been reduced to a scandalous footnote while still navigating her history with Eric, forcing her to confront whether love can survive when legacy weaponizes truth against humanity. Finn, haunted by the ripple effects of his disclosure, begins to recognize that ethics in isolation are insufficient, that truth divorced from empathy can metastasize into harm, and his arc evolves into a meditation on responsibility beyond obligation, as he seeks ways to mitigate damage in a world that prefers absolutes to accountability. His attempts to advocate for reconciliation are repeatedly rebuffed, reinforcing the script's bleak realism that institutions built on hierarchy rarely welcome moral nuance, especially when it threatens established power. As time passes, the absence of Ridge begins to distort the family's collective memory, with some characters subconsciously rewriting history to justify Eric's choice, while others cling desperately to shared moments that contradict the narrative of non-belonging, illustrating how truth itself becomes contested terrain once emotion and pride enter the equation. The continuation excels in depicting how disownment does not end relationships but poisons them, leaving unresolved attachments to rot into resentment, nostalgia, or denial, each more corrosive than the last. Ridge's attempts to form a new path, whether professionally or personally, are depicted as halting and uncertain, emphasizing that exile from a dynasty is not merely a change in circumstance but a form of social death, where credibility must be rebuilt from fragments and self-worth can no longer be borrowed from lineage. The script resists offering him immediate vindication, instead allowing space for introspection that exposes his own past failures, his complicity in the very system that ultimately rejected him, and the uncomfortable realization that he once believed blood entitled him to forgiveness he is now denied. Eric's isolation, conversely, becomes increasingly pronounced despite his maintained authority, as the continuation reveals that power without connection is an echo chamber, amplifying certainty while suffocating reflection, and moments of solitude expose a man grappling with the unintended consequence of his decisiveness, that by erasing Ridge, he has also erased a part of himself he cannot reclaim. There are fleeting hints of regret, quickly suppressed, reinforcing the tragic irony that Eric's greatest weakness is not cruelty but rigidity, an inability to revise identity once declared, even when evidence of emotional truth mounts. The family's younger generation absorbs these events as cautionary mythology, learning not that honesty is rewarded, but that belonging is conditional, and this subtle generational shift underscores the script's broader critique of dynasties that prioritize purity over compassion, teaching survival rather than love. The continuation culminates in a series of quiet confrontations rather than explosive showdowns, emphasizing that the deepest wounds are often inflicted in calm voices and upheld by silence, as characters come to understand that the DNA secret was never the real catastrophe, but merely the trigger that exposed long-standing fractures in how love, authority, and legitimacy are defined. By the end of this arc, there is no restoration, no dramatic apology, no triumphant return, only the sobering recognition that some truths, once acted upon without mercy, permanently alter the moral landscape, leaving behind a legacy not of clarity, but of loss, where every character must carry the weight of a choice that can never be undone, and Ridge's exile stands as a living testament to the script's central, devastating thesis, that family is not destroyed by lies alone, but by the refusal to temper truth with humanity, a refusal that echoes across generations long after the words "You're not my son" have faded into history, yet continue to define it. The continuation drives even deeper into the emotional and moral fallout, shifting its lens toward the irreversible transformation of everyone touched by Eric's declaration, and it becomes increasingly clear that the DNA revelation was not the climax of the story but the ignition of a slow, merciless unraveling that redefines what the Forrester name will mean for generations to come. Ridge's existence outside the family orbit begins to take on a haunting quality, as though he is living in parallel time, still breathing, still thinking, still loving, yet fundamentally disconnected from the world that once validated every choice he made. The script emphasizes that exile is not a single act but a sustained condition, one that erodes confidence day by day, as Ridge encounters subtle humiliations, doors that no longer open, opinions that no longer carry weight, people who once deferred now speak to him with careful distance, each moment reinforcing the brutal truth that identity in powerful families is rarely intrinsic and almost always conditional. What makes this phase especially devastating is the dawning realization that even if the DNA test had never existed, the foundations of Eric's love may have always been transactional, contingent on obedience, loyalty, and symbolic continuity rather than unconditional acceptance. Ridge begins to replay his entire life through this lens, questioning whether every conflict, every power struggle, every accusation of arrogance was unconsciously driven by a child's instinct to prove he belonged, and this retrospective grief becomes more suffocating than anger, because it suggests that the loss he feels now is not new but merely exposed. Eric, meanwhile, grows increasingly mythic in his isolation, elevated by authority yet cut off from emotional reality, surrounded by people who comply rather than connect, and the script uses this contrast to underline the tragedy of unchecked power, that it can enforce loyalty without ever earning love. His insistence on finality hardens into doctrine, transforming a personal decision into a moral precedent that echoes throughout Forrester creations, subtly instructing everyone beneath him that worth is measurable, replaceable, and subject to revision should inconvenient truths emerge. The continuation portrays how this atmosphere of conditional belonging infects even the most mundane interactions. As employees grow cautious, family members become guarded, and creativity itself begins to wither under the weight of fear, suggesting that a dynasty obsessed with purity inevitably sacrifices vitality. Eric's private moments, stripped of ceremony and audience, reveal a man plagued not by guilt but by unease, an undefined discomfort that surfaces in fleeting memories of Ridge as a child, flashes of laughter, pride, and shared ambition that clash violently with the narrative he has now imposed upon himself. These moments are quickly buried beneath justification, reinforcing the script's bleak assertion that pride, once elevated to principle, becomes almost impossible to dismantle without collapsing the identity built around it. Brooke's role expands further as the emotional historian of the family, the one who remembers what the dynasty once felt like before bloodlines became weapons, and her quiet defiance becomes increasingly dangerous in a world that rewards silence. She does not scream or threaten, instead, she asks questions that linger long after conversations end, questions about love, responsibility, and whether erasing Ridge truly protects the Forrester name or merely sanitizes it of inconvenient complexity. The continuation shows how her refusal to accept the official version of events isolates her as well, reinforcing the theme that empathy is often punished in systems built on hierarchy, yet her presence ensures that the story never collapses into moral simplicity. Finn, caught between